Hello, friends. I am so delighted to be joined here today by Kate Snow, who is a math educator on a mission to help parents raise kids who are capable and confident in math. With experience as a homeschool parent, classroom teacher, and curriculum writer, Kate holds a BA in mathematics from Harvard University and an MS in elementary education from Walden University. Kate is the author of Preschool Math at Home, the Math Facts That Stick series, and my family's personal favorite, the Math with Confidence curriculum. And she writes at kateshomeschoolmath.com. Kate, I'm delighted to be here today with you, and I just really appreciate you coming on for a second time to the podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Amy. I'm so excited to be here and so appreciative of your support for Math with Confidence.
Well, it's definitely a favorite with me and Isaac. So if anyone has not checked that out, they should. But today, I just want to jump right into some kind of mathy questions. There are
Oh,
more
good.
general questions we have talked about before, and I'll put a link to our previous conversation in the show notes. But this is a question I see come up a lot. And that's just this question of what actually is rigor in math? How do you find the right level of rigor for your particular child? What would be your perspective on that?
So I think when people talk about rigor, they're often talking about different things. So it's first important to kind of define what aspect of rigor you're talking about in this question. Some people see rigor as how fast a curriculum moves. So is this concept covered in fifth grade or is it covered in sixth grade? That's kind of the speed aspect of rigor. But it can also be about the level of abstract thinking that children have to engage in. So, for example, a third grader who's thinking about multiplication could think about that in a very concrete way or in a very abstract way, even with some programs even use some like letters as variables in that in third grade. And so it could be the same concept, but the level of abstraction. And then there's also a level of challenge and complication. Some programs really focus on complex multi-step word problems for children to solve. And so those are all very different ways to think about what rigor means. I think for parents, it can often feel tempting just be, I need the most rigorous curriculum possible, right? Because we all want our children to be capable and confident in math. We all have that same goal. We all want them to be doing great. But if you choose a program that's not well suited for your child, that doesn't mean your child's going to actually learn anything, right?
Right.
And so, for example, like Art of Problem Solving has a wonderful middle school and high school program that is probably the most rigorous program you can buy. It is amazing. But for most kids, it would be a disaster because it's so abstract. It takes so much complex thinking. It's very hard. And so for some kids, it's a wonderful like option for them. And then for other kids, a parent might spend hours a day kind of spoon feeding every morsel of information just to get the homework done without the child actually learning anything. And so when we're thinking about rigor for our own kids, we got to think about, well, what's actually going to suit them and help them learn the best. I think of it kind of like reading. I think that's an analogy that's helpful sometimes, where you don't want kids reading books that are or if, to help your child learn to read and then to learn to improve their reading. You don't want them to just be reading, super easy books, right? Because that doesn't help anybody grow. But you also don't want to give them War and Peace when they're in fifth grade. That's a very rigorous option for them. But it won't actually help them grow as a reader. It will teach them to hate reading. It will leave them confused. They might make their way through a chapter, but they'll have no idea what's going on and won't learn much from it. Whereas if you find a book that's, interesting to them, engaging at their grade level, at their reading level, then they can get in there, they can learn from that book, they can grow as a reader. And I think math's the same way. Like finding that, I call it kind of the Goldilocks spot, like not too hard, not too easy, just right, is where I recommend that parents look when they're trying to figure out what kind of math program to buy. Not just what is the most rigorous option out there, because for most kids, that's not actually what's going to help them learn.
And we've all heard, that one kid who read War and Peace in fifth grade. Okay, well, they did it. It must be possible. Therefore, that's my goal for my children, which
Mhm.
is on its face so silly. And we know that that would not be a good fit for most of our children, in the same way that some children seem to have a growth spurt very early and need larger
Mhm.
clothes, right? But
Right.
it's like we can't set up, or even within siblings. I find this even in my own family
Mhm.
within 5 kids, being ready for abstract thinking at very different ages. And that's not because some are good at math and some are bad at math,
Mhm.
it's
Right.
because their minds were just ready for a different part of math at a different stage. And if I had tried to force it in the wrong place at the wrong time, it would have been a disaster.
Right. It'd be like, well, I know some 9 months old can crawl, so I'm going to teach you how to crawl. We're going to do crawling practice, where it's like, no, 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 their brain's going to be there. It's going to be fine. But is it right now? Like, let's let them, let's meet them where they're at, not at where some other kid could be.
Yeah. This makes me think of this idea that this is one of my pet peeves. I hear parents say, "Oh, I'm not a math person," or even "I am a math person,"
Hmm.
or they'll describe that about their kids. Like, I have my math kid and my non-mathy kid. That non-mathy kid can't ever really be expected to thrive or understand with math. So, how do you kind of think about this idea? We know children, of course, are different, right? We
Right,
have different
right.
strengths and inclinations and interests. Of course, we do. But is there like maybe something wrong with this sort of like math versus non-mathy kid? And what do we do if we think we have a kid who's not mathy?
Oh, I love that question. I mean, like you said, some kids are just more interested in numbers, right? Just like some kids are more interested in history and some kids are more interested in dinosaurs. Like we all have our own interests and our own inclinations, and our kids' abstract reasoning grows at different rates. And so some kids who we call like really mathy in sixth grade might just, sorry, as a 6-year-old or a sixth grader, either way, whichever, it's just that their abstract reasoning has developed a little bit more quickly than average, and they've found something interesting about numbers. But then the the label we put on that child becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, either direction, right? And that's what I get very concerned about, especially when we think about how often girls in our society have been labeled as non-mathy, just simply because that is a stereotype that used to exist about girls, and to think of how that shortchanges girls. And so, there's a lot of research on kind of this idea of a growth mindset, that when you think that you're capable of learning something, you become a lot more capable of learning it. And that when you then continue to work at it, well, look, you get better at it,
Go figure.
Yeah, amazing. Um, and there's certainly like some kids are going to go faster and further in math. Some kids are going to be more interested, but the vast, vast majority of children are able to learn the regular school curriculum, by the time they graduate from high school, to get through Algebra 2, say, which is the graduation requirement in most states, and to do it in a way that is not painful. It doesn't have to be, again, you don't have to use the most rigorous curriculum, but that for most children, that is if you just take it step by step, building each year, just the little steps that help you grow. It's just kind of walking up the mountain, just like one little switchback at a time instead of like going straight up. And different kids need those switchbacks to be like a steeper, to take my metaphor further. Some kids need them real gentle, and some kids can climb them up a little faster. Um, but that all kids are capable of, not all kids, but the vast majority of kids are capable of getting there. And some kids do have significant learning differences that sometimes can make that difficult. And so not to discount that either, that there is a very small percentage of children for whom math is very, very difficult. And they may need, the parents might need some help from professionals in figuring out what's reasonable for this child, what accommodations can I make to help them learn as much as they're going to need for real life, and to get through kind of a college or high school graduation requirements. But from even most non-mathy kids are fully capable of it, and I don't like to label them that way because it's up to them. It's up to them to see. Like they should find for themselves whether they like math or not. We shouldn't put that on them as their parents.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that's something actually I'm very thankful. My mom always was really good at not sort of labeling like, oh, you're good at math or you're not a math person or, oh, you just, I was never a good test taker. That's another one, like, oh, so
Hmm.
because kids absorb the things we say about our own experience as
Hmm.
well. And it can kind of be something that becomes the story they tell themselves, right?
Hmm.
And so just because you have a child who's maybe very verbal and enjoys books, you don't say, "Oh, well, you're just a literature person, not a math person." I mean,
Right.
you could like both.
You can. And there's
It's
a big
fun.
difference between your ability to become proficient at something and the speed at which you become proficient at it,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Some kids take years to learn how to read, but we don't say that they're not readers or that they're not reading people. And
Yes.
like some kids take a little bit longer to learn math, but they're very capable of it and it'll benefit them for a lifetime to
Yeah.
master the basics.
Yeah, and bringing up that point of speed, sometimes we equate how quickly you can accomplish, a task or how quickly you master a subject or how quickly you can answer a math problem with your ability overall to understand it. And they're not the same thing at all. In fact, I'm seeing that very specifically with my youngest son right now. So, as one of the repercussions of chemotherapy and some of the treatment he's receiving, is actually it's shown to affect processing speed. And so we've had the opportunity to get some testing done with our hospital as part of his treatment plan, which I love that they
That's
like proactively
wonderful.
do that. It's amazing.
Hmm.
And so his ability to actually solve problems is unchanged, but his
Hmm.
ability to process has actually been decreased quite a bit.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so just sort of knowing that is not like, well, why can't you just be faster? Like
Yeah.
you're dumb. Like, no, it's just going to take a little bit longer for right now
Hmm.
as his
Yeah.
brain, rewires and works through that problem. And so if I didn't understand that the speed at which you can answer is not, necessarily correlated with your understanding, I might be much
Hmm.
more concerned. But as it is, I understand he just needs a little more time to get there, and that's fine.
Absolutely. And different kids have different sort of like internal set points for their processing time. Some kids are just tend to be slower processors than others, and that's just how God made them. And so it's okay for us to just give them a little more time. That's one of the beauties of homeschooling, is that
Yeah.
they're in a place where you can take the time, where they don't have to be trying to compete with 25 other kids shouting out an answer or whatever the case is.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm so thankful for homeschooling for many reasons, but that one for now for
Mhm.
sure. Well, one of the things I have loved about your Math with Confidence curriculum is how you really emphasize mastery of a concept in a new unit. We're kind of focusing on one particular
Mhm.
thing and we go over it and over it and make sure the student understands the new concept, but you're also regularly bringing in review from previous lessons. So, and they kind of cycle through like, oh, what are we
Mhm.
reviewing in this week's lesson?
Mhm.
So, can you kind of explain a little bit about the brain science of how spaced review helps kids remember what they've learned?
Certainly. I think it's one of the most fascinating concepts in education. So I'd love to talk about spaced review because it's so effective. So I think we tend to think of our memories as kind of like a storage unit where, everything's like neatly boxed on a shelf and we can just go around and like pick out the thing we need. So if I need to subtract fractions, I just like pick out subtract fractions. It's right there, right? But it turns like what brain science teaches, and I am not a brain scientist, so anybody who's really a brain scientist, please forgive me for the details I get wrong or the how crude my metaphor is, but for the way I understand it is that it's more like all those boxes are in the storage closet, but it's also very important to remember the path to get to the box. And that every time we go get the box, we strengthen that path. Or say it's in a field, we're in a forest, we're beating our way through the bushes, we're making that path just a little firmer and a little firmer. And our brain and how often we do that also affects whether or not our brain sort of keeps that information available to us. And so when we learn something, our brain isn't sure whether or not it's worth keeping yet. Is this like the code that I had to use to get my pass, get into my bank online or something? Or is this like fundamental information? Like, this is my social security number. I need to know it. And so the more times we go back to it and the frequency with which we go back to it affects whether or not our brain decides to keep it or not. If it doesn't, if we don't go back and find that box again, our brain, it's kind of like those planners on TV shows, home organization TV shows. They're like, if you're not sure, put it in a box, put a label on in 2 years. If you didn't find it, if you didn't need it, throw it away. You don't even need what's in that box. Our brain kind of does that with information, like you never recalled it, so out it goes. Um, but then the thing that's, I think, also very interesting about spaced review is that you need to start by reviewing information pretty close together. Like if you learned how to subtract fractions last week, it's really helpful to get back to it after a couple days. But then it can be a little longer, a couple weeks, and then maybe a few more weeks, and then even a couple months. But every time you go back to it, you're strengthening that connection. And so I actually like make a spreadsheet for Math with Confidence for like 2 days, 4 days, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and like I use that to plan the review so that we're cycling back to things in a longer and longer time frame, because that gives the brain even a chance to start to forget, and then you come back hopefully. This is the magic of it, and also the part that sometimes as a curriculum writer, I'm like, oh, am I right there? I think we're right there. We want to come back to it just as the brain is starting to be a little bit like, yeah, maybe we don't need that. But then you go back to it, and the brain says, oh, okay, this is important. I'm keeping it. And then strengthens that connection of how to find it. And okay, we're holding on to this information. So this box of china, we need this one. And so, yeah, so it's something you can use in any subject. If you really want your child to learn, I mean, learning poetry, learning Psalms, learning dates in history. It's wonderful to review like every day or every couple days at the beginning, but then once your child has it mastered, to kind of gradually space it out over the course of days, then weeks, then months, to come back to it and refresh it.
That makes so much sense. And it also is bringing some clarity to my own teaching with Isaac, where I'll be like, I know, like, we have reviewed like a certain topic, with
Hmm.
maybe mixed fractions or something like that. And I know that he understands it. He's done it multiple, multiple times, but it's
Hmm.
always that like it's been a few weeks and he like sees it
Hmm.
again and he's like, wait, what do I do with this again? And I'm like, I
Uh-huh.
know you know it, but that's good because then I start to remind him. And he's like, oh, yeah, now I remember. And then he
Exactly.
can go through. So it's just that like getting that brain to that pain point, almost about to forget, but rewiring, like getting that pathway really solid. Yeah.
And it can be really hard as a homeschool parent because you're like, I just taught this to you. We spent weeks on this, right? Like, it's so frustrating, or so like, what happened? This curriculum isn't working. But this is just like naturally how like our brains work.
Yeah.
And to know that that moment when they're about to forget, like you're actually like the child is going to remember it even better because it was about to go.
Yeah.
Like that actually strengthens it. If you did it every single day, you would keep it, but they would never have that space to start to forget it. And
Right.
so it actually helps to space it out for the long-term review.
Okay, we need to like do fan fiction of the Inside Out movies, but related to math math memories.
Love it.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot very positively about, kids are not necessarily like most children are able to learn math, all these things. Um, and those are all true things. But sometimes a parent can get to a point when they realize, oh no, my kid is really behind in math. Maybe the child has been pulled from school and has been struggling and they're like, how do I
Mhm.
even like catch up? What is behind grade level? Like what do I do? Or maybe it's been an
Mhm.
issue where that's been not something that's been a strength of the homeschool. And so it gets to the point where we're like, oh dear, my kid is behind.
Mhm.
How can a parent handle that? Like what's a step forward? And I guess there would be sort of like maybe that sense of, I think my kid's behind, like maybe not quite to grade level. And then maybe a more serious, like, no, my kid really is not
Uh-huh.
where they need to be. Yeah.
So, I think the first step is to not panic. Very, very important. And to think about like the long-term goal as opposed to the short-term place where you're at. Like I said before, in most states, getting through Algebra 2 is the graduation requirement, and that's sufficient for application to most colleges. And so if that's your senior year of high school, just working back, that means Algebra 2, Geometry, Algebra 1, pre-algebra. You can start pre-algebra your freshman year of high school, still do all four of those classes in sequence, and be so good. So if you're a lot of times, I work mostly with parents of elementary school aged kids. And so when I see somebody freaking out about their second grader, I'm just like, oh, it's so fine. It is so fine.
Have time.
You know? And really to be ready for like a pre-algebra program, really getting through most homeschool math books like sixth grade gets you ready for that. So there's a couple years in there there's a lot of mush, like what exactly programs cover, exactly what they're called, but um, you don't have to, there's some time. So first, taking a deep breath, not panicking, just knowing that there's plenty of time to do this. And so then it's a matter of, I think, really taking a second to think why. You mentioned several distinct possibilities for how people get behind. A child was just kind of lost at school and just kind of moving along with the class. There's been things going on in a family, and so math just hasn't gotten consistent teaching happening for a while. There's lots of reasons, of course, why it can, or why it can not be being taught consistently. But it could also be that the child is really struggling with it. We've been teaching math every day, and like we're way behind, and she's not getting it. And so taking a step back to think about what's the problem is also, of course, really important for figuring out what the solution is. Um, if it's a matter of just, oh, we need to increase our consistency, and if we keep going, we're going to be fine. Great, Or if it's we've been working really hard and she is not getting it, that might be time to talk to your pediatrician about getting more of an evaluation for learning disabilities. Um, and then sometimes it's just oh boy, like, yeah, we haven't been doing it consistently, but we really need to get on the ball now. How do we move forward? That's where I generally recommend that people think about doing kind of a condensed version of the grades starting back at the beginning and figuring out where you need to go. And so really focusing first on like whole numbers. Let's learn to add, subtract, multiply, and divide whole numbers. Okay, then fractions, decimals, percents. Let's learn how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide them, see how they're connect to each other, and then get ready for like a pre-algebra program. But so to streamline, don't go, if you have a 10-year-old who's real far behind, you might need to go back to some addition for 6 weeks or something. You do not have to go back and do a full first grade curriculum, and also know that a 10-year-old is going to be thinking more abstractly than a first grader is going to be making connections. This will go faster than if you were starting with a 6-year-old. But you may need to go back and really backfill some things. And so to figure out, just focus on those core concepts and move forward is my main suggestion if you're in that place.
I love that. Okay, so number one, don't panic.
Very
Number
important.
two, for most children, you have time to kind of catch up or get back on track.
Mm-hmm.
3, really ask, why are we behind? Is this an actual learning challenge that we're facing, or is this a consistency issue? And then that will kind of then streamline your decisions from there. And then I think that's really encouraging to hear that if it is a matter of like, we have some real gaps in our learning, you don't have to go back and do an entire first grade and an entire second grade kind of curriculum, because that could feel overwhelming.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, go back and make sure you haven't missed any of those fundamental things, because that's all going to kind of cumulatively impact later on.
Yeah. I mean, even things, yeah, so many simple things that seem like multiplication in third grade. Like nobody really, like I can't remember the last time I did 2-digit times 2-digit multiplication by hand in my everyday life, right? But there's a lot of principles in there that then do really apply to fractions, to decimals, to algebra, where having those basics do make a difference.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, as we're talking and thinking about maybe older children in particular, I think we all are wanting to encourage our children in independence and having them take more ownership of their learning. That's such a great thing to be transitioning, especially like in those middle school years. I really feel
Hmm.
like those are some kind of pivotal years to start training them for independence. But
Hmm.
sometimes we get a little ahead of ourselves because we've got a lot of things going on. We might have a
Yes.
lot of kids or a lot like a side business or like whatever. And we're
Hmm.
like, here, great. You're old enough. Go do your math.
Go forth and conquer.
Yeah, I have 100%. I will just like confess right now. I've done that, especially with algebra. I'm like, okay, you can like you're old enough. Just go do your algebra. It'll be
Figure it
fine.
out. Yeah.
So, how do we encourage the independence without leaving our older kids completely on their own devices?
Such a good question. And yes, so this is definitely for middle school and beyond. I really believe that most elementary school students really need like a teacher who is in it with them most days, who's really keeping them on track. Very few kids are mature enough to be very independent at all until they're getting towards sixth, seventh grade. So once you're hitting that point and ready for that, and your child's demonstrating that kind of maturity, I think there's kind of two main components, two ways I think about it. One is really teaching them the study skills they need to be able to do that before you release them to more greater independence. And then second, really providing some excellent accountability for the follow through. Um, and so when I talk about study skills, I'm thinking about things like teaching your child how to read math, that we read it differently than a story, that we read every word. We make sure we understand every word. Great mathematicians might have to read their book 3 times before they understand what's going on. I was in my college math classes, I would sometimes have 5 pages to read in my math text, and it would take me like 3 hours like to work through the examples and really understand what on earth was happening. So learning how to read math, learning how to set up paper, if you're using a textbook, learning how to set up your assignments, to show your work neatly, um, to use an answer key. Like a lot of children are ready to use an answer key to check their own work, but then to really be teaching them, the point is that you learn the math, not that this assignment is completed. I just had a very fun, it's an aside. I just was helping a friend's high school junior figure out what was going so wrong for him in algebra 2. And it turned out that his teacher at the school he goes to was giving them the answer keys, and he would just write the answers under each problem. And so,
Well, that doesn't help at all, does
yeah,
it?
so I'm like, oh, and so you're not learning it, are you, buddy? Like, so that's where that accountability piece comes in, right? So but to teach those study skills, sometimes I think we really overestimate what kids already know how to do in terms of these kinds of study skills and how very explicit they need to be, that we need to be in teaching them, to really model them, describe what we're doing, to think aloud, like, okay, I'm on assignment 6.1, so I'm going to find assignment 6.1, really talk that through to equip them. Otherwise, they're just kind of left to go do it on their own. And to emphasize that the point is to learn it. So what do you do if you have a question? What do you do if it's not making sense? You go back and read the examples. You ask questions. You write a note, that it's not just about somehow making it through the problems. And
Right, yeah.
then,
I've had that kid who's just like, I'll be like, "Oh, did you do your work today?" "Yeah, I did it." And then I go back
yeah,
to look and I'm like, "Well, you skipped like half the questions." They're
yeah,
like, "Yeah, but I didn't know how to do them."
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
okay.
The goal of
Okay.
today was for you to learn this material.
Right.
Right. It's
Exactly.
like I just don't need a stack of completed worksheets. That's not like we're not a worksheet farm, where our output is worksheets. Like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
The learning is what we're going.
Actually understanding the
Yeah.
material.
And so that's where that accountability comes in. So making sure that, you're looking at your child's work very regularly at the beginning to make sure that they're actually doing it and asking lots of questions. How do you know that this is the right, or like, tell me about this concept. You explain it to me. Be the teacher. How do you know? Like, or compare and contrast this. Like, how is adding decimals like adding fractions? How are they different? Um, and being a resource, it's very important as children get more independent that they have a resource for those questions.
Mm.
And so that you're available to answer those questions regularly so they don't just get in a hole of not understanding. If they're just floundering forward, 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 that gets real ugly real fast. And even the most responsible kids, as they get into those upper grades, like high school level math courses, they will need somebody to ask questions. And so I really do encourage parents to make sure either if to make sure that you have the math skills to at least be able to go into the book and figure out what's going on. You don't have to work through every assignment with them. But if you don't feel comfortable going into that algebra book and reading it and feeling like, oh, okay, I see what they're teaching here. I understand. I like the box that holds algebra, the path is not very well worn, but it will come back when I have this book in front of me. Um, if you don't have that, it's very important that your student have somebody, if it's an older sibling, if it's your spouse, if it's an aunt or uncle, or a paid tutor or a co-op class, but somewhere there needs to be somebody who can say like, oh, okay, here's why we're factoring the polynomials,
Yeah.
and provide that support because otherwise it can be very, the math gets hard. It's very abstract. And so having that support is really important.
I think that is one of the nice things about technology now, right? Like I have helped
Mhm.
one of my cousins who's actually in high school now, but she's my first cousin. I've done
Mhm.
like little video calls where she's like, I don't understand this math problem. And I'll be like,
Mhm.
okay, let me show you how to work this. And then with my own children, it's appropriate at certain times to outsource classes,
Mhm.
sometimes not because I don't like understand or remember the algebra or
Mhm.
geometry or pre-calculus or whatever, but because you know what? You're going to listen to that other person a
Yeah.
little bit more peacefully than you listen to me.
That is
And
also
that's
a
helpful
big
too.
factor. Everybody's still liking each other at the end of this process.
Huh?
Also an
Yes.
important thing. Yes.
Okay, well, while we're still talking about older students, I know that we do a lot of hands-on math learning in the younger years and games and things like that. Totally Isaac's favorite part of his math day. But what about older students? Are they too old for math games? Is that a waste of time?
Definitely not a waste of time, but I think it's definitely one where kids' personalities come to the fore. So I'm pilot testing sixth grade math with confidence right now. And it's been so interesting to see how just the kids are starting to diverge in how they feel about math games. Kids who have loved math games all the way, like they want to be more independent. They want to be studying math a little bit more separately from their parents. And so there's a small group of kids who are just like, no, 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 like I don't want to do math games. And then there's some kids who are still like, I want all the math games. So it's been interesting working that out. And so they're still included in they will be included in sixth grade math with confidence when that comes out in 2 years. Um, but there'll be less, and because kids are ready for more abstract thinking, more pen and paper thinking, but also you just sometimes need a math game. Even in the midst of algebra, it's good to just, beat your mom at tic-tac-toe with finding the variables that match, or and that's been really fun for me actually as we get into more complex math and sixth grade math with confidence to be figuring out like, what can we do with exponents? Like, how do we make a game out of dividing decimals?
Ooh.
Um, you know, so I don't think no one's ever too old, but it's also okay if, kids are wanting to be more independent and whenever if so for people who use math with confidence, there are a lot of games. And I always say, like, if you don't have time to play the game or your child doesn't want to, like, it's not about the game, it's about the learning, right? So just figure out from the game board, like, I bet you can make 5 problems or practice problems for things on the game board. The point is like practice the skill, learn the skill with some coaching with your parent really still involved in watching you and hanging out with you. So pick those. You can just do those as practice problems together and then the child can move on if you're just not feeling it that day for some reason.
Yeah, I think that's helpful because I think a lot of times with really any curriculum, not just math, like moms want so much to do it right. And they
Hmm.
have such a good desire to do this thing well. Like this is our calling, this is our job. We're like, this is
Hmm.
important that we give our children a good education. And that's a
Hmm.
wonderful goal. But sometimes we forget that we're actually like the teacher and the curriculum is a tool. If something isn't the right thing that we need to do that day, we actually have the freedom to set that problem aside, set that game
Hmm.
aside, combine those activities. And that's okay. You're not doing anything wrong. I'm sure you would agree as a
Oh,
curriculum writer, like you are
absolutely.
providing opportunities. You're just wanting to make sure every child and every parent has enough opportunities to meet
Hmm.
lots of different ways kids learn, but you're not expecting every single child to do every single thing in every single
No,
book.
exactly. Because, so I pilot test thoroughly. I get feedback from about 150, 200 families. So I learn a lot through that process. And I try to, I adjust it before put out the final version. But the range of people people's experiences within that pilot test group even are vary so much. I'm so aware of the fact that I do not know your individual child. You know your individual child. And so I'm kind of aiming to make sure there's, like you said, opportunities. As my pilot testers say, well, we can always cut, but it's a lot harder to add. And so I try to make sure that if in doubt, if I think some kids are really going to need something, it's in there. But to know that, hey, if your kid's getting this, or, you can just like go through this quickly. You can be like, oh, nope, we got that. We're skipping that. That's all perfectly fine. And that from watching your child. Again, it just comes back to this. What's our goal? Actual learning. If the actual learning is happening, then we are in great shape, whatever path we take to get there.
Yeah. Well, what about the parent who maybe is like, this is great, but you don't understand. Like, I never did well in math. I don't even know if I remember anything. You're talking about algebra. I'm not even sure I remember fractions, and it just
Hmm.
feels really, like, I don't know, like a little nervous, just not
Yeah.
very comfortable with their own math skills. Like, what
Mhm.
encouragement or advice would you give to that parent?
Well, the first I would say is have that growth mindset, that believe that you are capable of learning because you really are. Like it really, if you are managing all the things required to like homeschool your children, you have a lot of capability. And I think you can learn math. You probably like a lot of people had a really terrible math education. Math has often not been taught very well in our country. And so if you didn't get a very solid foundation, it doesn't mean you can't. Or if it was always hard for you when you were in school, it does not mean that it has to always be hard for you or that you're not capable of learning it. But then along with that, I say then make sure you're ready to learn with your child. Um, Especially in those early years where, make sure like you're really, oh, I'm really getting this. Like, read the book, study the diagrams, turn your brain on and make sure you're just really thinking as you go through, especially the early years, because you'll start in a place where you're probably more comfortable and you'll grow right along with your child. So like right now in sixth grade, like I said, the pilot testing sixth grade math with confidence right now, and we're doing division of fractions, which is probably one of the most poorly understood concepts in the elementary to middle school math curriculum. And it's so fun to see so many of the pilot moms saying like, "Oh, I get this now. This multiplying by a reciprocal thing. I now I see why we do it. I had no clue before." And so to enjoy the aha moments along with your child, because you'll probably have some, and you might find that you like math a lot better than you thought you did.
I love that. And also your kid will probably be excited if you're like, "Oh, like coming with a joyful attitude like, I don't
Hmm.
remember this. Can you explain this to me?" Oh, kids
Hmm.
love that to be able to tell mom, "Oh, I got this, mom. Let me explain this to you."
Absolutely. And to have that exploratory attitude, right? Like, we're trying this, we're figuring it out, because that's the attitude you want your child to have to math too, right? Like, I can figure this out. I might not get it at first, but that's okay. Like, I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to keep exploring it and I'm trying to understand it and I'll get it.
Yeah. Okay, I have to take a quick rabbit trail before I move to the next question
Sure.
because I like have a distinct memory of when we got to the whole like invert and multiply thing when I was whatever grade I was when I was learning that and I was like, "No, mom, like you got to tell me why this works. Like I
Hmm.
don't believe it. You can't just tell me to invert and multiply. That makes no sense." And so she thankfully had, this is before the internet. So she had to like call someone on the actual phone. She happened to know a math curriculum writer. So she called him and she was like, "Why do we invert and multiply?" And he explained it to her and she explained it to me and I was like, "Okay, now I believe you." But I
Hmm.
still remember just the joy of like the well-chosen one and thinking about that. And before I even had a blog, I recorded a video about explaining inverting and multiplying for
That's
a
great.
friend.
Oh, I love it that you have such a passion for it. That's
Such a
awesome.
nerd, such a nerd. And then the sad thing is my kids don't care. They're like, "I don't know. I just want to invert and multiply." I'm like, "Don't you
Yeah.
want to know why it works?" They're like, "No." I'm
No.
like,
Mm-mm.
"Why?" Okay.
And some kids don't want to care, and that's okay,
And that's what we do.
But you should try to make them understand a little,
Yeah, just
which
a
I'm
little
sure
bit.
you did.
A little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you will understand.
Yeah.
Well-chosen ones are important. Okay. Well, this was a question that came from a mom in my online homeschool community, Made to Homeschool. And she asked if your child seems to be really getting it and they're flying through lessons, Should I keep doing one thing at a time in the order it is taught, or can I skip through?
Well, and this kind of goes to what we were talking about, right? That most curriculums have more than you need. That they're giving you an array of options. And if you find your child is learning well without doing every single exercise or every single lesson, or if you're combining lessons, that's completely fine. You just have to keep paying attention. You might, if sometimes if you combine too much, it's easy to assume our kids know things. I guess that's really what I say. Like sometimes they just seem so like angelic, like, oh yes, I totally get it. And then, you get 3 lessons down the road and you're like, oh
You don't
no.
know this.
So try to make them prove that they know it before you do that. That'd really be the best thing in that moment. Be like, okay, like do this or explain this to me. Tell me why it works. But then if you do get a little bit ahead further into the program, you're like, ooh, that no, okay, we're gonna take a little backtrack and then we'll come back to this. That just keep paying attention. Again,
Yeah.
does my child know it? Are they learning? And oh, if we miss something, we can just go back. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. And I found too, like, instead of just like skipping a whole thing, like, okay, well, show me, you say you understand this, so just show me that problem really quickly. And you
Hmm.
can kind of see if they can just sort of do it super easily and they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, literally, I can just tell you the answer without even having to write anything down. I just get
Hmm.
this, then that's one thing. But if they're like really having to work on it, maybe making some careless errors,
Yeah.
that's where you're like, okay, well, you did such a great job. Let's do a couple more practice problems, you
Uh-huh.
know?
Right, exactly. And sometimes I think one thing I've really found in the process of pilot testing is that different kids are able to absorb different amounts of information in one sitting.
Mm,
That some kids really need like a little breather. Like they can really just take like one little part of a concept, they need a breather, then they get ready for the next part. And some kids are like, they see that first part of the concept, like, oh, let's go. Like, where is it going from here? And so that's also, if you're using a program that's very incremental, you may just find like, hey, we're ready to like, we did this increment today. We don't even need to do the practice page because we're ready to combine it with the next one that takes it that step further.
yeah.
And that's really just a matter of, yeah, like how much kids are able to take in one sitting.
Yeah. Curriculum is the tool. You are the teacher, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And you're teaching the real kid in front of you.
Yes.
The
Not the
real kid.
generic ideal child.
Exactly.
Kate, this has been absolutely delightful. I really appreciate you and all of the incredible resources you give us in the homeschool community for math. But here
Oh.
at the end, before I close, I want to ask you the questions I ask all my guests. And so the first is just, what are you reading lately?
So I just finished Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. It's in the Olive Kittredge series, and it's just this wonderful series about kind of a community in Maine, and she looks at different protagonists in the different books and then kind of pulls them all together in this book, which I really enjoyed. Just a lovely kind of slow, thoughtful book for the winter here in Michigan. And
Sounds
then
very cozy.
yes, and then I'm also in a what we call it the long book club where we read one long book a year, like that we wouldn't necessarily tackle otherwise. And so we're reading Moby Dick this year. And so we break it into thirds and we basically meet, to discuss each third of it over the course of the year. And so I'd taken a little breather after our last session, but now I'm getting ready to we're about to meet the whale, I think. So I'm excited to get back to it and talk about it with those ladies in January.
I'm excited about that. I have done my book club generally takes 2 months in the summer. So generally we read like a couple books a month, but in the
Hmm.
summer we take something longer and take two
Hmm.
months for it. And that has been helpful to attack some of those longer books. But we haven't done Moby Dick. I did recommend that one to my teen daughter who is rapidly coming to the end of all the lists I create for her. But I was like,
Uh-huh.
just so you know, that one has a lot to say about fish.
A lot, so much about fish, but I'm loving it. I don't know. I knew nothing about the whaling industry and how important it was in American history. So it feels like I feel like I'm learning a lot. And it's a very strange book too.
Yeah, I love
Different
that.
chapters are in different formats. Like there'll be like a play or like different perspectives. Yeah, it's way weirder than I expected it to be, which I'm really enjoying.
Yeah, I love that. All right, final question. And I'm
Mhm.
editing this one a little bit for you from the question I normally would ask. And this
Mhm.
is just, what is your best tip for turning around a math lesson that seems to be going all wrong?
Mm. So first I do my usual checklist of things that could be the problem, which are Hungry, thirsty, need the bathroom, tired, sick. So first we rule out those. And next step would be to say, let's back up the train to something more concrete. So whatever we're doing, let's make it more concrete with either with hands-on manipulatives, with a real life situation, something that applies to your life. Let's make, because usually often the problem in math is that something has gotten too abstract and the child's just a little bit lost. It's like, what is happening here? I do not get it. These are just numbers on a page all of a sudden. So to back it up to something real. And after that, I'd usually recommend calling it a day, or at least calling it a lesson. Because most, if this is kind of an out of the ordinary kind of thing for your kid, if this is just this lesson is going haywire, often no more good can be done in that situation. And it's okay to just say, like, we're going to try it again this afternoon, or we're going to try it again tomorrow. And often just that little pause is enough just to reset the emotions, take everybody's emotional temperature down. And
Maybe moms needs it too.
maybe moms too. That's always possible.
Have a cup of coffee, have a piece of chocolate.
Exactly. And just, some days just aren't meant for fractions, and
Yeah.
that's okay.
I will say too, I have found that sometimes if I just take the pencil, that is another thing that's really helpful.
Ooh,
Like
that's a good one.
sometimes it's
Hmm.
just like the one too many things where I'm having to like think and I'm having to process and I'm having to read and I'm having to write all at the same time.
Yes.
And it's just too much. And sometimes if I just take the scribe duties and I say, okay, look,
Hmm.
you just tell me what to write, especially with like younger kids or kids who still
Yeah.
struggle with the fine motor still skills,
Hmm.
like then it's like, okay, well now suddenly the math is just flowing. It was just like
Hmm.
something, it was getting
The
stuck in the pencil.
stamina or
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Well, Kate, thank you so very much. Please tell people where they can find you all around the internet.
So my publisher is Well Trained Mind Press. So you can find my books at welltrainedmind.com or at Amazon. I write at kateshomeschoolmath.com. And then if you use Math with Confidence, I also have a very active and fun Facebook group that I highly recommend. So if you're looking for support with Math with Confidence, just search for the Math with Confidence community on Facebook. And there's something like 10,000 moms on there now, mostly moms, who are just, helped each other troubleshoot, celebrate successes, and enjoy math with confidence together.
There are so many amazing resources too that moms have like put together, like,
Oh my
oh, here I've
gosh.
collated this whole thing, or oh,
Yeah.
here's this collection of books that I've done. So it's a great
Hmm.
resource for
It
sure.
is. I really appreciate all of it. It's such a wonderful, collaborative, and positive community. I just such a happy corner of the internet. I only dip in occasionally because I'm still frantically writing sixth grade math with confidence, um, but I do really enjoy it. Oh, and I should also say, so if I've been talking about sixth grade math with confidence here, but fifth grade math with confidence will be coming out this spring or summer in June 2024. And then sixth grade will come out.
2025.
Sorry, it'll be
Yeah, yeah.
2025. Oh, thank you. Oh boy, that good catch. Fifth grade will be coming out in June of 2025. And then sixth grade will be coming out in June of 2026. And that will be the final volume in the Math with Confidence series. So I'm excited to wrap it up and help kids get ready to move on to pre-algebra, algebra, and beyond.
I know. Well, we'll have to save our conversation for like middle school math for maybe in another year. We'll bring you back in a few seasons.
Yes. I'm getting a lot of questions about that in my pilot test group, so it's definitely on
Uh-huh.
my mind. I'll definitely have some more resources for folks and some recommendations at that point.
Well, I will have links to all those things you mentioned and in the show notes for this
Great.
episode at humilityandoxology.com. I would love it if you are watching this or listening, if you would send this episode to a friend that you think might need a little bit of encouragement or help for homeschooling math. And please leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you're listening. It helps other homeschool parents find this encouragement. And Kate, I always enjoy speaking with you and chatting with you, and I hope to do so again.
Oh, I do too, Amy. Thank you so much for having me on. This was just such a pleasure.